Ambassador Kethvar's crystalline fingers trembled as she read the transmission for the seventh time. The words hadn't changed, but their implications grew more terrifying with each reading. The hegemony had fallen. After 3,000 years of unbroken peace across the galaxy, the brutal Zalthak Empire had shattered the greatest coalition in known history in a single devastating campaign. She looked up from her console to observe the human ambassador across the conference table. David Chen sat motionless, his dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the viewport. His species had been the newest addition to the Galactic Council, admitted only 50 years ago after demonstrating basic faster-than-light travel. Most council members had viewed humanity as a curious novelty, a young species with strange customs and an inexplicable fondness for what they called fiction. Ambassador Chen, Kethvar began, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones of her crystalline vocal cords. I fear we must discuss the implications of the hegemony's collapse. The Zalthak war fleets are mobilizing across 17 sectors. Chen finally looked at her, and she was startled by the intensity in his gaze. How many died? The question caught her off guard. Most species would inquire about territorial losses, resource implications, or diplomatic solutions. Trust a human to ask about casualties first. Initial reports suggest significant losses. The Veltar homeworld was glassed. The Kulen colonies went silent 3 days ago. She paused, accessing the latest intelligence feeds through her neural interface. Conservative estimates place civilian casualties at 47 billion souls. Something shifted in Chen's expression. The polite diplomatic mask he'd worn for 5 decades cracked, revealing something far more primal beneath. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Kethvar's crystalline structure resonate in frequencies she'd never experienced. Show me the declaration. Kethvar hesitated. The Terran Accords, humanity's entry documents into the Galactic Council, contained several classified annexes that most members weren't authorized to view. But given the circumstances, she activated the holographic display. The standard diplomatic language appeared first, but Chen gestured impatiently. The real one. Section 12, subsection 7. Her optical sensors widened. Very few beings knew about that particular clause. She input her authorization codes, and new text materialized above the table. The language was stark, clinical, utterly unlike the flowery diplomatic prose that typically filled such documents. Terran Accords. Classified Appendix 12.7. Contingency Protocols for Existential Threats to Galactic Civilization. In the event of genocidal warfare targeting civilian populations on a scale exceeding 10 billion sentient casualties, or the complete breakdown of interstellar law and order, the Terran Federation reserves the right to implement extraordinary measures for the preservation of galactic civilization. These measures may include, but are not limited to, unrestricted warfare protocols, suspension of conventional rules of engagement, and the deployment of assets previously classified under the Geneva Conventions of 2157. The Terran Federation acknowledges that such measures may be considered extreme by galactic standards. However, humanity's historical experience with existential threats necessitates these provisions. Chen stood and walked to the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back. In the distance, the great space station's traffic lanes buzzed with fleeing refugee ships. My species has a saying, he said quietly. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We learned our lessons well, Ambassador. We learned them in blood and ash and the screams of the dying. Kethvar processed his words, cross-referencing them with humanity's historical databases. What she found there made her core temperature drop by several degrees. Wars that consumed entire continents, weapons that could erase cities in seconds, a species that had nearly driven itself to extinction before finally achieving peace through the bitter wisdom of having seen the alternative. You're going to fight them, she realized. Chen nodded without turning around. The Council spent 3 millennia believing that civilization was the natural order. That peace was the default state of the universe. They forgot that peace is not a gift, it's a choice. And when someone chooses otherwise, he finally faced her, and she saw something that made her species' ancient survival instincts scream warnings. Well, humans have always been good at teaching others the value of good choices. Within hours, the fastest courier ships in the galaxy were racing toward Earth. The message they carried was simple: a copy of the Zalthak war crimes reports and a single line of text. The children are dying. How quickly can you respond? The answer came back within days, transmitted on all frequencies across known space. It wasn't addressed to the Council or to any government. It was broadcast to the Zalthak Empire itself, to the Zalthak High Command. You have 48 hours to cease all military operations and surrender your war criminals for trial. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification, signed in the blood of our ancestors and the tears of our children, the Terran Federation. The galaxy held its breath. The Zalthak predictably responded with mockery and threats. They had conquered a dozen species. What could one young civilization possibly do to their mighty empire? They learned the answer when the human fleet arrived. There were no fancy formations, no parade ground precision. The Terran ships moved like predators, dark, angular vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They didn't announce themselves with the pompous declarations favored by most species. They simply appeared and began their work. Later, xenobiologists would debate whether humanity's approach to warfare was the result of their evolutionary background or their cultural development. Philosophers would argue about the morality of their methods, but in that moment, as the Zalthak Empire crumbled under an assault that combined technological superiority with a ruthlessness that shocked even their enemies, only one thing mattered. The children stopped dying. 3 millennia of peace had ended, but from its ashes rose something new. Not the naive hope that had characterized the old order, but the hard-won wisdom that peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the victory of those willing to fight for it. And humanity had always been very, very good at fighting for what mattered.